"We will not be shackled," Chancellor Malcolm Bell of Earth declared, surging to his feet. The sharp sound of his palm striking the council table sliced through the cacophony of voices, silencing the chamber in an instant. Tension hung heavy in the air, the faint hum of the station's gravity stabilizers, the only reminder that order still lingered amidst the chaos. His steely gaze swept across the semicircular assembly of alien dignitaries. Glimmering exoskeletons, translucent appendages, and smooth, scaled skin shimmered under the cold blue light of their stations, a testament to the galaxy's diversity. Yet none dared meet his stare, as if the weight of his defiance filled the chamber itself. "The agreements we made were clear, collaboration, not submission," Bell continued, his voice crisp and deliberate, cutting through the silence like a blade. "And yet here we stand, accused of overreach, of being a threat. Let me remind you, esteemed counselors, every action we've taken was in service of stability in a galaxy that teeters on the edge of chaos." The murmurs began almost immediately, rippling through the chamber like a current. High Counselor Thalon Verith, a being whose elongated face radiated calm authority, raised a translucent hand to restore order. "Chancellor," his voice was measured, "this session is convened to assess the implications of humanity's approach." We've seen enough implications." The interruption came from the far left, where the accuser, Zelaran, sat. His elongated, sinewy frame leaned forward, his emerald green scales catching the chamber's light with a faint shimmer. Vertical pupils, embedded in piercing yellow eyes, locked onto the Chancellor with a predatory intensity. His snout-like face, lined with faint ridges and flared nostrils, twisted into a sneer as his forked tongue flicked briefly between sharp, curved teeth. The chamber seemed to grow colder as his hissing voice carried his disdain. "Your stability, Chancellor, is nothing more than reckless aggression. Shall we recount the destruction left in your wake? Or do you wish to enlighten us with yet another excuse for deploying lethal force on matters the Council could have resolved peacefully?" The Chancellor turned to face his accuser, his expression unflinching. "Is that how you perceive us? Reckless aggressors? Allow me, then, to set the record straight. Let me take you to Dromath's fall." The chamber dimmed slightly as the holographic interface flickered to life. The Chancellor's voice did not waver as he began. "Dromath's fall, 6 years ago. The United Earth Defense was stationed near the Outer Rim, patrolling trade routes when distress signals flooded our channels. A pirate conglomerate had amassed a fleet large enough to rival a mid-tier council protectorate. They weren't interested in ransom or negotiation. Their sole objective was to annihilate the Dromathian colonies and seize their resources. The hologram displayed a field of shattered Dromathian ships, their crimson hulls adrift amidst debris. The faint glimmer of a pirate fleet loomed in the distance, like a pack of wolves circling wounded prey. "The Council had not intervened," the Chancellor continued, "and by the time we arrived, the colony's defenses were crumbling. What we found was a situation beyond negotiation. Civilians outnumbered their defenders tenfold. They were out of time. So, we adapted." The holographic image shifted, showing a formation of Earth's warships moving in disciplined unison. "We feigned a retreat," the Chancellor explained. "The pirates pursued us, their greed blinding them to the trap we'd set. We lured them into a dense asteroid belt, and there we used their arrogance against them." The scene unfolded. Earth ships, equipped with gravitic charges, detonated the asteroid field around the pirates. The cascading destruction was chaotic, yet precise. The pirates' once formidable fleet fragmented into fiery debris as Earth forces re-emerged, striking with devastating precision. The Dromathian colonies were saved. "Our tactics weren't conventional," the Chancellor admitted, his voice carrying a measured gravity. He glanced briefly at the hologram, the stark remnants of the battlefield reflecting in his gaze. "Do you think those decisions came lightly? Every move we made bore consequences we will carry with us forever. But in the face of chaos, we adapted because the alternative was unthinkable. Those who call us dangerous should ask themselves, what's more dangerous? A species willing to act to protect the innocent, or those paralyzed by protocol and fear? A suffocating silence gripped the chamber as the hologram faded, its ghostly remnants still lingering in their eyes. Several counselors shifted uncomfortably, their gazes darting between each other as if questioning their own inaction. The Chancellor's gaze swept across the room, meeting the stunned expressions of counselors who, for the first time, seemed to grasp the price of inaction. The accuser was quick to counter, his claws tapping sharply against the table. "Necessary." His voice seethed with restrained anger. "And at what cost? Your efficiency obliterated an entire sector's trade network. Collateral damage, you called it. Tell me, Chancellor, how many more innocent lives will you gamble with in the name of your so-called protection?" A low murmur of agreement rippled through certain sectors of the chamber. The High Counselor intervened before the murmurs could swell further. "Order, counselors. We are here to deliberate, not to accuse without evidence. Chancellor, you have made your case, but I must ask, do you truly believe such methods can coexist with the principles this council upholds?" The Chancellor's reply was immediate, firm. "I believe the council's principles are noble, but I also believe that principles alone cannot save lives. Action does, sacrifice does, and humanity understands this better than most." He gestured toward the center of the chamber, where a faint blue orb representing the galaxy spun slowly. "This galaxy is not a utopia. It is brutal, unpredictable, and if the Council expects us to navigate it, shackled by the fear of offending delicate sensibilities, then I say the Council misunderstands what it takes to survive." The chamber buzzed with renewed tension. Lines were being drawn, alliances silently tested. The accuser's face twisted, his indignation barely contained. "Your arrogance, Chancellor, jeopardizes not just this Council's principles, but the fragile stability we strive to maintain." The Chancellor didn't flinch. Instead, he folded his arms, his voice calm but unyielding. "Humanity's methods have saved countless lives, and I'm not here to apologize for that." The silence that followed was heavier than before. The council chamber seemed to breathe in unison, awaiting the next move in this war of words. The chamber's silence was pierced by the rhythmic tapping of the accuser's claws on the polished surface of his station. The sound, deliberate and sharp, echoed like a countdown. His yellow eyes glinted, cutting through the growing tension. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a venomous weight that drew the attention of every counselor present. "Since humanity insists on painting themselves as saviors, let us examine the reality of their methods." His forked tongue flicked between words, emphasizing each syllable. "Your tactics, Chancellor, may have saved some, but the ripples of your actions have fractured the stability this council is sworn to uphold." The holographic projector activated once more, this time displaying the barren expanse of Zathar. The once vibrant colony was reduced to smoldering wreckage, its terrain scarred with deep craters and twisted metal. The image shifted, showing ships of Earth's fleet hovering ominously over the decimated landscape. The visual alone sent murmurs rippling through the assembly, some counselors recoiling visibly, their expressions shifting from concern to outright disapproval. "This," the accuser hissed, gesturing to the projection, "is Zathar, a mining world under the jurisdiction of the Varathi Protectorate. They petitioned this council for aid against rogue elements in their sector. And what did humanity do?" The hologram zoomed in, displaying harrowing images of displaced civilians. Translucent Varathi figures, their bruised and pallid skin dimming with exhaustion, clung together in crude shelters, cobbled from the wreckage of their lives. The accuser's voice cut through the heavy silence like a blade. "You speak of efficiency, Chancellor. But did the Varathi people ask for their homes to be reduced to ash? For their lives to be shattered by your so-called ingenuity?" The Chancellor's jaw tightened, his posture rigid, his expression an enigma. The faint stirrings of unease among the other counselors emboldened the accuser, whose voice now carried a venomous edge. "Allow me to recount the events, step by step. A Varathi mining outpost raided by smugglers, a threat small enough to be contained if handled with precision. But humanity did not choose containment or negotiation. No, you responded with a fleet. Incendiary charges rained down in your pursuit of the raiders, and your actions scorched not just the smugglers, but the land itself. The Varathi people were left with nothing. What you called justice, Chancellor, was annihilation." The hologram shifted again, the visuals now raw and searing. Earth's warships unleashed payloads that ignited firestorms across Zathar's surface. The devastation was inescapable, its magnitude etched into every frame. "Efficiency," the accuser hissed, the word dripping with disdain. "A thin veil for destruction so vast, this council cannot and will not condone it." The murmurs swelled, and the accuser seized the momentum. "This is not an isolated incident. Humanity's actions are a pattern of escalation, of chaos. For every life they claim to save, they destabilize an entire system. The galaxy cannot afford their recklessness." The hologram faded, leaving behind an eerie quiet. The accuser leaned back in his chair, his expression triumphant, as though the weight of his argument had already sealed humanity's fate. But the Chancellor was unmoved. "That's a compelling story," the Chancellor began, his voice calm but edged with steel. He took a step forward, commanding the room's attention. "But like most stories told with intent to condemn, it's incomplete. You forgot the most important part." He gestured toward the holographic interface, and with a subtle nod, his own narrative unfolded. The projection displayed the smuggler's fleet, larger than the accuser had described, bristling with stolen council-grade weaponry. The smugglers were not mere raiders. They were heavily armed marauders operating an illicit arms trade. "These weren't simple smugglers," the Chancellor said, his tone clipped. "They were supplying arms to factions destabilizing 3 adjacent systems. When the Varathi Protectorate failed to contain the threat, we acted. Yes, Zathar suffered collateral damage, but had we waited for endless deliberations in this very chamber, those weapons would have fueled a galactic war." The projection shifted again, showing intercepted transmissions between the smugglers and their buyers. The evidence was damning: entire fleets mobilizing, rogue factions plotting coordinated strikes across council territories. The Chancellor's voice rose, commanding authority. "We acted decisively because hesitation would have cost exponentially more lives. The destruction you see, accuser, is tragic, but necessary. If you want to blame someone, blame the smugglers who turned Zathar into their stronghold." The room was divided. Some councillors nodded subtly, acknowledging the Chancellor's point, while others whispered among themselves, their expressions clouded with uncertainty. The accuser, however, was relentless. "Collateral damage? That's your defense, Chancellor? That innocent lives are an acceptable price for your so-called efficiency?" The Chancellor's gaze remained steady. "Innocent lives are never an acceptable loss. But sometimes they're an unavoidable one. The smugglers chose Zathar as their battlefield. We didn't. The Varathi Protectorate failed to protect their own, and we acted to stop a far greater threat." Tension crackled in the chamber, the lines between support and opposition growing sharper with every exchange. The High Counselor raised a hand, his voice calm yet imbued with authority. "Enough," he said, the weight of his words silencing the room. "The arguments on both sides are clear. What remains is whether humanity's methods align with the principles of this council." The Chancellor exhaled slowly, his hands pressing firmly against the table. "Principles are what guide us. But principles cannot remain rigid. They must adapt to the realities of a galaxy as vast and unpredictable as ours. Humanity doesn't act out of recklessness or malice. We act because, too often, this council is paralyzed by indecision." The accuser's eyes narrowed, his voice like a hissed accusation. "You seek to disguise your chaos as necessity. But necessity is a dangerous precedent. If every species acted as you do, this galaxy would spiral into anarchy. And if every species waited for permission to act, it wouldn't survive, the Chancellor retorted, his voice rising with conviction. We don't revel in destruction, accuser. We abhor it. But survival demands sacrifice. That's not chaos. It's reality. The chamber erupted into murmurs once more, the weight of the debate palpable. Some councillors exchanged glances of agreement with the Chancellor, while others leaned toward the accuser's position, their distrust evident. The High Councillor sighed deeply, the lines of weariness etched into his face as he scanned the room. This debate is far from over. We must consider all perspectives before reaching a resolution. Let us proceed with order. The Chancellor stepped back, his expression firm and stoic. The battle of words had only begun, but the divisions within the Council were glaring. Humanity's future within this assembly hung precariously, with both risk and opportunity poised to tip the scales. The tension in the chamber lingered like a storm, unbroken by the High Councillor's call for order. The Chancellor remained standing, his hands resting firmly on the edge of the table as his gaze swept across the room, meeting the eyes of those who now whispered their uncertainty or defiance. For every councillor leaning toward support, there was another whose face twisted with skepticism. With deliberate calm, the Chancellor straightened. "I can see the room is divided," he said, his voice measured, yet carrying enough force to quell the rising murmurs. "But before we draw any conclusions, let me offer another account, one that illustrates what humanity's resolve truly means when faced with impossible odds." The chamber dimmed as the holographic projector activated once more. The familiar hum filled the air, accompanied by a vast star field that shimmered into view. The scene quickly shifted, zooming in on a distant binary system with a pale blue star flickering ominously beside its dying red giant. A fleet of hostile ships, a seething mass of angular predatory designs, filled the projection. "This is Kevolus Binary," the Chancellor began, his voice steady and unyielding. 3 months ago, a rogue military faction armed with experimental stealth tech launched a surprise attack on a resource-rich colony near this system. The United Earth Defense was tasked with intercepting the fleet before they reached the core settlements. The projection shifted to show a comparative analysis. Earth's fleet was outnumbered 3-1. The opposing forces' ships bristled with advanced weaponry and shields that appeared resistant to traditional countermeasures. "They had every advantage," the Chancellor continued. "Their ships were faster, their weaponry unmatched, and their stealth capabilities allowed them to strike without warning. We knew engaging them directly would be a death sentence, but retreat was not an option. Those colonies held millions of lives, and the Council," he paused, letting the implication linger, "was still debating whether intervention was warranted." His words drew scattered glances among the councillors. Some avoided his gaze altogether, their discomfort palpable. "So we adapted," he pressed on. The hologram displayed the Earth fleet moving into a defensive formation. "We had limited resources, but what we did have was ingenuity. Using experimental predictive algorithms combined with hyper-adaptive drone swarms, we identified their attack patterns. We then used one of their greatest strengths, their stealth tech, against them." The scene shifted to the heat of battle. Earthships deployed a series of specialized drones that flooded the battlefield with electromagnetic pulses and sensor disruptors. The rogue faction's ships flickered momentarily, their cloaking fields destabilizing as they were bombarded with precisely timed attacks. The Chancellor's voice grew more Olympus as the battle unfolded. "By forcing them to engage on our terms, we turned their overwhelming numbers into a liability. They were drawn into a kill zone where our fleet could exploit the gaps in their formation. Within hours, we had neutralized their flagship, and the rest of their fleet collapsed into chaos. The projection concluded with the remnants of the rogue fleet retreating, their shattered ships scattering into the void. The Earth fleet, battered but victorious, regrouped over the colony's skyline. The Chancellor let the silence settle before speaking again. This victory wasn't just about our technology, he said, his voice lowering. It was about our ability to think fast, to outmaneuver a superior enemy under conditions when there was no room for error. Without intervention, that colony would have been obliterated. Millions would have died. The hologram faded, leaving the chamber in dim light once more. The Chancellor's gaze swept the room, meeting the mixed expressions of awe, unease, and skepticism. Then, as expected, the accuser's voice broke the silence. "Impressive," he drawled, though his tone carried an undercurrent of disdain. "But let us not ignore the obvious. This adaptability you tout so proudly rests on a dangerous foundation, experimental technology that could easily spiral out of control. How long before your predictive algorithms deem entire civilizations necessary collateral? How long before your drones target allies under the guise of protecting your interests?" The murmurs rose again, a tide of uncertainty swelling among the counselors. Sensing his momentum, the accuser leaned forward, his claws curling against the table. "Let us not forget what these advancements mean for the rest of us. Humanity has demonstrated time and again that it values victory above all else. Their actions, no matter how effective, create instability, a chaos that this council cannot afford." He gestured broadly, his voice rising with calculated fervor. "I present to this chamber evidence of collateral damage from humanity's so-called interventions. Whole systems plunged into economic collapse, refugees numbering in the tens of thousands. This is not the work of a protector, it is the work of a disruptor." Holographic projections of desolate worlds and displaced populations filled the chamber, underscoring the accuser's point. Some counselors nodded, their faces grim. Others cast furtive glances at the Chancellor, their uncertainty deepening. The Chancellor, however, remained composed. He waited until the accuser's display concluded, then stepped forward once more. "Every action has consequences," he said evenly. "But let me be clear. Humanity does not act in pursuit of chaos. We act to prevent it." His voice sharpened as he addressed the room. "Yes, our methods are unconventional. Yes, they carry risks. But so does inaction. You've seen what happens when this council hesitates. Entire systems fall to rogue factions, pirates, and worse. Humanity doesn't wait for the perfect solution, because we understand that sometimes there isn't one. Sometimes you have to act now to save lives later." The chamber remained divided, the tension thick enough to cut. The accuser seized the moment to make his final move. "This is exactly why humanity must be reined in," he declared, his voice echoing with authority. "They lack the restraint, the foresight, that is necessary to preserve galactic order. I call upon this council to demand humanity's full submission to its authority. Only then can we ensure their power is used responsibly." The declaration sent a ripple through the room. Lines were being drawn, alliances forming and fracturing in real time. The High Counselor raised his hand once more, his expression heavy with contemplation.
"This matter is of grave importance," he said, his voice calm yet firm. "We must consider the implications of both arguments before rendering a decision. The debate will continue." The Chancellor stepped back, his expression Olympus. His gaze remained fixed on the accuser, the fire in his eyes unextinguished. The battle of words was far from over, and humanity's alliance with the Council teetered on the edge of uncertainty.
The Chancellor stepped back, his expression steady, his gaze locking with the accuser's. In the dim light of the chamber, a storm of alliances and betrayals brewed, humanity's fate balancing on a razor's edge. The battle was far from over, and the galaxy waited, breath held for the next move. The tension in the council chamber hung like a storm cloud, thick and suffocating. Counselors exchanged glances, the divisions between them as stark as ever. The High Counselor, his long, translucent fingers resting on the table, opened his mouth to continue the deliberation when a sharp, resonant tone sliced through the air. A crimson light pulsed above the table, followed by a string of beeps and garbled static. It was an emergency alert. Another and another. The table's holographic interface sprang to life, displaying a cascade of incoming messages from multiple star systems. The chamber erupted into chaos. Counselors scrambled to activate their stations, the fragmented sounds of desperate voices filling the room as emergency broadcasts overlapped. A visual feed from one of the systems appeared in the center of the chamber, a planet under siege. Vast, jagged ships blotted out the stars, raining fire upon the surface. Cities crumbled under relentless bombardment, their skyscrapers collapsing into clouds of ash and rubble. Entire districts were reduced to glowing craters, the screams of the defenseless echoing faintly through the broadcast. "It's them," a counselor whispered, his voice barely audible over the din. "The Krathor." The name rippled through the room like a cold wind. The Krathor, a species believed to be confined to the galaxy's farthest reaches, were relentless conquerors infamous for their campaigns of utter destruction. Their incursions into council space had been sporadic and quickly suppressed in the past, but this was different. Their numbers were overwhelming, their tactics coordinated and devastating. A series of additional feeds flickered into view, each more horrifying than the last. A planetary shield collapsing under sustained assault. Ground forces swarming helpless colonies. Massive angular ships carving through council fleets as if they were paper. The air in the chamber grew heavy with despair. "They've breached Larati's Prime's orbital defenses," one counselor shouted, his voice breaking with disbelief. The calm, calculated demeanor he had upheld moments ago crumbled, leaving only raw panic. "Our fleets, destroyed in minutes. Arcanos, my homeworld is under siege," another cried, gripping the edges of his station as if it could anchor him in this storm of chaos. The accuser stiffened as another message flashed across his console. His yellow eyes widened briefly, then narrowed into slits as he read the transmission. For a moment, he hesitated, his forked tongue flicking nervously before he muttered under his breath, "Not Arkal." His claws curled into the table, the tension in his voice betraying a fear he couldn't mask. "My people will not fall to this madness." The High Counselor rose to his feet, his usual calm shattered by the storm of panic. "Silence," he commanded, though his voice wavered under the weight of the unfolding catastrophe. The room quieted, but the desperation remained palpable. "This cannot be happening," Commander Zelleran muttered, his claws tapping nervously against the table, his gaze darting between the holograms as if searching for a solution that did not involve the humans he had so vehemently opposed. For all his fervor and conviction during the debate, now his scales seemed to dull, his gaze flitting between the grim displays as if searching for an escape from the grim reality. The Chancellor of Earth remained standing, his arms crossed, an expression unreadable. Unlike the other counselors, he showed no panic, no flinching at the horrific images. He had seen such chaos before. He had prepared for it. The High Counselor Thalen Vayrith turned to the Chancellor, his translucent features pale. "Chancellor," he began, his voice trembling, "these attacks, they threaten the very foundation of our galaxy. The Council must survive this day." The Chancellor said nothing, his expression unmoving. "Please," the High Counselor pleaded, his voice breaking. "We need humanity's fleets. Without them, these worlds will fall. My world will fall." The other counselors turned to the Chancellor, desperation etched into their features. Those who had moments ago criticized humanity now looked at him with hopeful, pleading eyes. "Humanity's intervention," one counselor stammered. "It's the only chance we have." The Chancellor's gaze swept the room, his eyes narrowing slightly. The chamber fell silent. Even the accuser, who had vocally opposed humanity moments before, could not find his voice. The weight of the Chancellor's words settled over them like a heavy shroud. The Chancellor stepped closer to the table, his voice steady and commanding. "You want our fleets? Then hear me clearly. Humanity doesn't act out of convenience or obligation. We act because it's right, and when we act, we don't do so half-heartedly. If we intervene, we will fight with everything we have. The High Counselor nodded, his gaze unwavering. We understand. Please, Chancellor, save our worlds. The Chancellor didn't reply immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the High Counselor as the room waited in tense silence. With a single nod, he stepped back from the table and activated the interface on his station. The holographic screen flickered to life, its blue glow casting sharp shadows across his face. "Secure channel," Chancellor Malcolm Bell commanded. The system obeyed instantly, establishing a direct link to the United Earth Defense Command Network. A static-laden voice answered, precise and formal. "Command Operations, this is General Jeremy Torren." "General Torren," the Chancellor began, his voice steady, but edged with urgency. "We have a situation. The Council is under coordinated assault by the Krathor. Priority transmission. We need immediate mobilization of 12 fleets for defensive operations across these systems." He gestured to the interface, and a detailed list of the besieged planets flickered into view. Worlds representing the diverse tapestry of the Council's members. Their names were as varied as their ecosystems, some marked with flames indicating critical danger levels. The Chancellor's voice sharpened. "These worlds are falling, General. Their defenses are already crumbling. Dispatch 12 fleets with a focus on large-scale planetary engagements. Our window for intervention is closing." General Torren's reply came swiftly, a testament to humanity's disciplined chain of command. "Understood, Chancellor. UED Command is mobilizing assets as we speak. Estimated deployment, 40 minutes. You'll have your fleets." The Chancellor nodded curtly. "Good. Keep me updated on fleet readiness and deployment progress. Bell out." As the transmission ended, the Council chamber buzzed with a renewed sense of motion. Councillors leaned into their stations, whispering hurried commands to their aides, or staring helplessly at the cascading feeds of destruction. But the crisis was far from over. Reports of devastation continued to stream into the chamber, each more grim than the last. "Loratis Prime has gone dark," a councillor's voice cracked, his translucent features pale as the holographic feed showed the planet's surface engulfed in flames. Entire cities had been reduced to smoldering ruins, their protective domes shattered like glass. "Arcanos orbital platforms are failing," another voice shouted. The feed displayed the collapse of a massive orbital ring, its structure disintegrating under sustained bombardment. Shards of metal rained down on the planet below, igniting wildfires that consumed entire regions. Commander Zel Aran stared at his own console, his claws trembling as he read the latest update. "Arkal's last fleet has been annihilated," he muttered. "Their stronghold has fallen." A new feed flickered into view, showing a Krathor warship plowing through a scattered fleet of Council defenders. The alien vessel was a monstrous amalgamation of jagged metal and dark energy, its hull bristling with weaponry. With each shot, its beams tore through the Council ships like paper, leaving nothing but debris in its wake. The silence that followed these reports was suffocating, broken only by the trembling voice of the High Counselor. "How much longer?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. 35 minutes, the Chancellor replied, his tone even but cold. "The fleets are coming." Without warning, the station itself shuddered violently. The polished floor beneath the Counselor's feet quaked as alarms blared. A deep, resonant boom reverberated through the chamber, followed by the unmistakable sound of a distant explosion. The lights flickered, plunging the room into intermittent shadows. "They're here!" a counselor shouted, his voice breaking. The holographic display shifted, revealing the station's outer perimeter. A Krathor assault fleet had emerged from the void, their ships appearing like predators in the dark. They wasted no time, opening fire on the station's defenses with devastating precision. Massive energy beams tore through the outer defense grid, the protective barriers collapsing in a cascade of sparks and fire. The station's defensive turrets rotated to respond, but their counterfire barely grazed the attackers, their shields absorbing the blows effortlessly. Shields are failing. A panicked voice rang out over the station's internal comms. From the observation deck, the battle unfolded in brutal clarity. The Krathor ships were massive, their blackened hulls absorbing light like voids given form. Their movements were eerily coordinated, each ship striking key points in the station's defenses with surgical precision. Explosions rippled across the station's outer rings, debris spinning off into the cold expanse of space. The chamber erupted into chaos as the station rocked again, sending counselors stumbling. A jagged crack splintered the ceiling, exposing a flickering layer of the station's internal shielding. High Counselor Vareth gripped the table, his translucent hand trembling as he stared at the destruction unfolding before him. "We can't withstand this," a counselor cried. "The station will collapse." The Chancellor remained calm, his voice cutting through the panic like steel. "Get the evacuation ships prepped. Prioritize the non-combatants." "And what about us?" Zelleran hissed, his composure cracking. "If the Krathor breach this station, they won't," the Chancellor interrupted. The station trembled again as another blast rocked its outer shell. Shards of the council chamber's ceiling cracked and fell, scattering across the polished floor. The High Counselor gripped the table for stability, his translucent hand trembling as another shudder echoed through the chamber. Lights flickered erratically, casting the room into intermittent darkness. The Chancellor Bell's expression hardened as he activated his console, opening a secure channel with a single command. The holographic interface buzzed faintly as the connection stabilized. "Admiral Finton Siddig," he said, his voice firm despite the chaos around him. The line crackled momentarily before a clear image of the Admiral appeared, his grizzled face framed by the dim glow of a command bridge. "Chancellor," Siddig replied, his tone clipped, his eyes narrowing slightly. "We just picked up the energy signatures near the station. They're consistent with Krathor incursions. What's your situation?" Bell's reply came quickly. "The station is under coordinated assault. Multiple vectors, heavy firepower. They've already breached the outer defenses. It's only a matter of time before they penetrate further. I'm transmitting all available data now." Bell's hands moved swiftly over the console, pulling up a detailed analysis of the station's current condition and the attack patterns recorded by its automated systems. As he hit transmit, he leaned closer to the projection. "We need your fleet here immediately." "We're en route," Siddig said without hesitation. "Tactical analysts are on standby. We'll review the data en route and adjust accordingly. Estimated time to engagement, 10 minutes. Bell's jaw clenched. "Understood. I'm relying on you to stabilize this." As the channel closed, Bell's voice echoed across the chamber. "The fleets are coming." He turned to face the assembly, his words cutting through the rising panic. "Evacuation protocols must be initiated. Non-combatants first. The Council must endure." The High Counselor nodded weakly, his usual composure replaced by a flicker of desperation. "And what of the attackers?" "Let us do our job," Bell said firmly, pivoting back toward the live holograms detailing the ongoing assault. His attention lingered on the jagged silhouettes of Krathor ships swarming the station, each precision strike a calculated blow to its integrity. On the bridge of the UES Hercules, Admiral Siddig watched as streams of data flooded the tactical displays. His command crew worked in synchronized efficiency, parsing through the patterns embedded within the Krathor's assault. "Analysis," Siddig barked, his voice cutting through the low hum of the bridge. Lieutenant Commander Kira Madsen, the tactical officer, stepped forward. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, and her sharp eyes reflected the cascading lines of data. "Sir, they're exploiting every structural weakness in the station's defenses, targeting critical systems just enough to keep the Council forces reacting instead of responding. It's calculated chaos." Siddig's brow furrowed. "What's their endgame?" "They're isolating sections of the station," Madsen replied. "Once those areas are cut off, they'll force critical systems offline. It's a siege, Admiral." Siddig nodded grimly. "Projected vulnerabilities?" Madsen's analysis updated in real time, highlighting several sections on the holographic map. "Here and here. If they breach these, The station's internal shields will collapse. Siddig straightened. Send the findings to the UED command network. Tell them to relay this data to the planets under assault. Let them know all the tactics the Krathor are using, and they'll soon regret the miscalculation of meeting our fleets. As the orders were carried out, Siddig turned toward Sergeant Neil Sofair, his communications officer. Signal the fleet. I want all wings in a high-speed formation. We're going in hard and fast. No time to dance around this. The Hercules surged forward, flanked by its escort ships. A ripple of activity spread across the fleet as human vessels accelerated into attack positions. Their hulls gleamed against the void, sleek and battle-worn, each ship a testament to Earth's history of survival against the odds. In just a few minutes, the fleet dropped out of FTL travel, appearing at the edge of the battle. The station loomed ahead, surrounded by chaos. Krathor ships swarmed the perimeter, their angular designs pulsating with an eerie, dark energy that seemed to absorb the faint starlight. Human sensors immediately registered the carnage. Council defense turrets failing, debris fields expanding, and explosions rippling across the station's outer sections. Hostile targets acquired, Madsen called. Fleet positions updated. Orders, sir? Siddig's voice was calm, unwavering. Strike hard, strike fast. Prioritize targets closest to the station. No prolonged engagements. Clear the perimeter first, then push them back. The human fleet moved with precision. As they closed the gap, the lead ships unleashed coordinated volleys. Pulses of energy beams and kinetic projectiles slammed into the Krathor formations, tearing through their front line. The first wave of attackers faltered, their angular hulls crumpling under the assault. Adjusting enemy formations, Madsen reported. They're regrouping near the central docking ring, likely preparing a counteroffensive. Not if we box them in first, Siddig countered. Deploy drone squadrons to isolate their movements. Force them into the kill zone. The drones surged forward, weaving between enemy ships with a fluidity that seemed almost organic. Their attacks were relentless, severing escape routes and disrupting coordinated strikes. The Krathor ships, accustomed to overwhelming their prey, struggled against the calculated aggression of the human fleet. On the observation deck of the station, the remaining counselors watched in stunned silence as the battle unfolded. Human ships darted between explosions and debris, each maneuver executed with chilling precision. For the first time since the attack began, a sliver of hope pierced the suffocating despair. Bell's voice broke the silence. They won't stop until the job's done, he said, his tone carrying a weight of certainty that seemed to steady those around him. Siddig's fleet pressed the advantage. Smaller Krathor vessels splintered under concentrated fire, while larger ships faltered, their shields buckling against the relentless assault. Within minutes, the once dominant Krathor formation was in disarray. Status report, Siddig ordered. Hostile forces retreating, Madsen replied. Their rear flank is exposed. Good, Siddig said, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. Push them back, but don't let up. They need to remember what happens when they target the Council under our watch. I want them all down. The Krathor fleet reeled from the unrelenting assault. Human ships pressed their advantage with surgical precision, exploiting every exposed flank and fractured formation. The once coordinated enemy began to splinter, their movements losing the brutal synchronization that had defined their initial dominance. Drones reporting heavy damage to multiple enemy vessels, Lieutenant Commander Madsen called out from the tactical station. They're attempting to regroup, but their rear flank is completely compromised. Push harder, Admiral Siddig ordered, his voice unwavering. Target their command vessels. Cut off their ability to coordinate. The Hercules shifted position, its broadside unleashing a cascade of kinetic projectiles that ripped through the core of a Krathor cruiser. The impact split the ship apart, sending fragments spiraling into the void. Nearby human vessels followed suit, focusing fire on the remaining command ships. Each volley brought another explosion, another collapse in the enemy line. Yet the Krathor did not retreat quietly. Their desperation manifested in a ferocious counterattack, their weapons blazing with renewed fury. Beams of dark energy lanced toward the human fleet, catching 2 frigates in their path. The smaller ships disintegrated under the onslaught, their crews lost in an instant. Frigates Bravo 2 and Echo 6 are down, Madsen reported, her voice tight. Enemy fire is intensifying. Siddig's expression hardened, but his determination remained unshaken. Pull remaining frigates back to a defensive screen. Cruisers, hold the line. Drones to the vanguard. Keep their attention divided. The bridge of the Hercules remained a hive of controlled chaos. Officers moved with practiced precision, their focus intact despite the mounting casualties. The fleet's movements were relentless, each maneuver a calculated strike designed to exploit the enemy's disarray. A burst of static interrupted the command channel. "Admiral," came the voice of Captain Idris from the Olympus, one of the lead ships in the assault. "We've identified their flagship, coordinates marked on tactical display." Siddig's gaze locked onto the highlighted target, a towering Krah-Thor warship bristling with weaponry. Its angular hull seemed to pulsate with an ominous energy, and it moved with a deliberate menace, rallying the remaining enemy forces around it. "That's the keystone," Siddig said, his tone sharp. "If we take it out, the rest will crumble. All units, focus fire on the flagship. Priority 1. The human fleet converged on the massive vessel. Streams of coordinated firepower lit up the void, battering the flagship's shields in a relentless assault. The Krah-Thor responded with a barrage of their own, but their strikes grew increasingly erratic as human tactics continued to outmaneuver them. Aboard the Hercules, Madsen monitored the battle's progression with hawk-like precision. "Shields on the flagship are degrading," she reported. 40%, 30, 20. "Prepare the kill shot," Siddig commanded. "Captain Idris, lead the charge. Take it down." The Olympus surged forward, its weapons blazing. With a final, concentrated volley, the Krah-Thor flagship erupted in a blinding explosion, fragments scattering into the surrounding fleet. The remaining enemy ships faltered, their formations breaking apart as their command structure collapsed. "Enemy forces are retreating," Madsen called out, relief tinged with the adrenaline in her voice. "We've broken them." Siddig's face remained stoic as he surveyed the battlefield. "Ensure they don't regroup. Pursue and neutralize any stragglers. I want the station clear of threats." The human fleet moved methodically, mopping up the remaining Krah-Thor ships. The battle had been short, but the cost was evident. Debris littered the void, and several human vessels down, and others bore the scars of the brutal engagement. Yet the station, battered but intact, stood as a testament to their victory. "Admiral," Madsen said, her voice quieter now. "Incoming message from UED Command. Reinforcements have reached Loratis Prime. Reports indicate the Krah-Thor forces there have been repelled." A faint smile flickered across Siddig's face. "Good. Inform them that we're securing the station and will regroup shortly, and relay our findings. Let them know what worked." One by one, updates poured in from the systems under siege. Each message brought news of human fleets arriving just in time to turn the tide. The relief in the voices of planetary leaders was palpable, their gratitude a stark contrast to the devastation they described. "Arkanos reports a full retreat," another officer announced. "The fleet there neutralized the attackers with minimal casualties." "Arkal is secure," came another update. Reinforcements cleared the orbital space and landed ground support. As the battle drew to a close, Siddig opened a secure channel to the station. Chancellor Bell's image flickered to life, his expression a mask of steel. "Admiral," Bell said, his tone firm but carrying an undertone of exhaustion. "I trust the station is secure." "It is," Siddig replied. "The Krah-Thor forces here have been neutralized. They underestimated us, Chancellor. That won't happen again." Bell nodded, his gaze steady. "Reports are coming in from the other systems. Our forces turned the tide, Admiral. Without humanity, the Council would have fallen, and I'll make sure they remember that. Thank you, Admiral." Siddig's expression softened slightly. "We're not done yet, Chancellor. There's still work to do." The Chancellor inclined his head. "Then let's finish it." On the Council, as the transmission ended, The chamber began to stir. The counselors, who had watched the battle unfold in stunned silence, now murmured among themselves. Relief mingled with awe as they processed the sheer scale of the human intervention. One by one, their consoles lit up with messages from their homeworlds. Each update confirmed the same story. Human fleets had arrived, pushed back the invaders, and secured their planets with an efficiency that left no room for doubt. For the first time since the attack began, a sense of hope filled the chamber. Yet it was accompanied by a sobering realization. Humanity's strength was not just in its firepower, but in its ability to adapt, to act decisively when others hesitated. The chamber's heavy silence was shattered by the sharp tapping of claws against the polished table. The accuser, his emerald scales dulled by a mixture of exhaustion and frustration, rose slowly to his full height. His piercing yellow eyes scanned the room, lingering on the flickering holograms that displayed scenes of devastation across Council territories. With deliberate care, he adjusted his posture, projecting an air of confidence that barely concealed his underlying tension. "This," Commander Zelleran began, his voice hissing with restrained fury, "is precisely why humanity must be brought to heel." His words were deliberate, calculated. Their actions, though effective, are reckless. They operate without regard for collateral damage, for the delicate balance this council strives to maintain. Chancellor Bell's intervention today, while undeniably successful, only underscores the chaos they invite into our galaxy. A murmur rippled through the room. The accuser seized the moment, his forked tongue flicking briefly as he leaned forward, addressing the chamber with fervor. Today, they repelled the Krathor, but what of tomorrow? What happens when their so-called ingenuity turns inward, or when their unchecked aggression spills over into our worlds? I call upon this council to enforce its authority. Humanity must submit fully to our oversight, or we risk watching our galaxy spiral into anarchy. Several councillors nodded, their faces betraying their agreement, but the majority remained silent, their expressions unreadable. High Councillor Thalon Varith, seated at the center of the semicircle, observed quietly, his translucent features inscrutable as the tension in the room mounted. Chancellor Bell, standing at his station, didn't flinch. He allowed the room to simmer, the accuser's words hanging in the air like a challenge. Then, with deliberate precision, he stepped forward. His every movement radiated calm authority, a stark contrast to the accuser's barely concealed outrage. "You speak of chaos," Bell said, his voice steady but sharp enough to cut through the murmurs, "of risks and recklessness. But let me remind you of a truth this council seems eager to forget. Chaos does not arise from action. It festers in inaction. The chaos you fear exists because time and again, this council hesitates, paralyzed by protocol, bound by principles that crumble in the face of real threats." The chamber quieted, the weight of his words settling over the room. Bell's gaze swept the assembly, meeting the eyes of each counselor with unflinching determination. "Today, humanity acted," he continued, his voice rising slightly. "We acted because this council could not. We acted because, while you debated the morality of intervention, entire systems burned. We acted because, unlike you, we understand that survival demands sacrifice. It demands boldness. It demands freedom." The accuser sneered, but Bell pressed on, his tone sharpening. "You call us reckless, yet it was our fleets that saved your worlds. You call us dangerous, yet it was our ingenuity that turned the tide. And now you stand here, not in gratitude, but in condemnation, demanding that we kneel before you. I will tell you now, plainly, humanity will never kneel." His final words rang out like a bell, reverberating through the chamber. The tension in the room thickened as the councillors exchanged uneasy glances. The accuser's composure cracked, his claws digging into the table as he prepared to counter. But Bell wasn't finished. "For years, we've sought collaboration," Bell said, his voice steady and laced with indignation. "We've extended our hands, offering partnership. And while we prefer diplomacy, make no mistake, we will not compromise our freedom for your approval. Humanity is not for sale. We are not your subjects. We are your allies, if you so choose. But if you cannot accept that, we will leave this council and defend our own." The chamber fell into stunned silence. Even the High Counselor, who had remained composed throughout the debate, shifted slightly in his seat. Bell's words hung in the air, daring anyone to challenge him. For a moment, it seemed as though the accuser would, but his tongue flicked nervously, and he remained silent. It was the High Counselor who finally broke the tension. Rising from his seat, his translucent features betraying a flicker of weariness, he addressed the room with a calm but authoritative voice. "The Chancellor has spoken with clarity and conviction," he said, his gaze sweeping over the assembly. "And I believe we would do well to heed his words. Humanity's actions today have proven their value, not as subordinates, but as equals. To demand their submission now would not only be folly, but an insult to the lives they saved." The accuser's eyes flared with anger, but he held his tongue as the High Counselor turned to Bell. "Chancellor Bell," he said, his tone softening slightly, "the Council owes humanity a debt of gratitude. We will not pursue measures to limit your freedom. Instead, once this crisis has fully passed, I propose we convene to discuss how we might strengthen our partnership. Together." Bell inclined his head slightly, his expression unchanging. "Then I suggest we do so with open eyes and clear purpose. The threats we face demand unity, not division." The High Counselor nodded, and for the first time since the attack began, a sense of calm settled over the room. The murmurs subsided, replaced by a quiet acknowledgement of the gravity of the moment. Bell took a step back, his hands resting on the table's edge as he surveyed the chamber. His gaze lingered briefly on the accuser, whose glare had dimmed to a simmering resentment, before addressing the room one final time. "Now excuse me, counselors," he said, his voice steady and cutting through the lingering tension like a blade. "I have a war to end, and time is running out." With that, he turned on his heel and strode confidently toward the chamber's exit. The heavy doors hissed open, revealing the chaos beyond, alarms blaring in deafening bursts, their shrill cries slicing through the distant rumble of explosions. As the doors slid shut behind him, the chamber fell into a heavy silence. Every counselor knew they had witnessed not just the resolution of a debate, they had seen the turning point of a whole new era. Hey there again. I'm glad you've come so far. Hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to hit the like button and the subscribe button. This is really important to the channel. Really important.